So Thomas is asking, so yeah, so if you're a construction worker, you would need a CLB7 to qualify under the human capital priority stream. Yeah, that's correct. You would. And in that case, you'll probably will qualify as well under FSW or CEC because you have those language requirements. And unfortunately, yeah, to be selected here, you would have to be there. Now we'll get to a different express entry stream, which is with Ontario, which is the skilled trade stream. So it is possible that you might get a client with less language skills who can qualify there. And we'll get to that stream, which is a good one. And we'll talk about the advantages of that stream as well. So what have the draws looked like for the human capital priority stream? So they varied. So as I said, when the program started in around June or July of 2015, it was just random, people who were above 400. Then they started to have draws that were not specific to occupations or not specific to jobs. It was just, okay, 430 something, whatever it was. And then this year, they've only had one general draw, which was in January. So basically no restrictions on knock or having a job offer in Ontario or anything like that. And then the people that they invited there had the lowest score was 439. So again, it is relatively high to be able to get an invitation there, but not as high as 460 and 450 as the people who were being invited under the federal draws. Then the rest of the draws this year under the human capital priority stream have been targeted. So in May 31st and August 15, it was people who were in certain occupations as their primary knock. So it was 0114, other administrative service managers, 0601, corporate sales managers, 1122, professional occupations in business management consulting, 0124, advertising, marketing, and PR managers, 0621, retail and wholesale trade managers, so a lot of managerial jobs, as you can see, 1111, so auditors and accountants, 3012, registered nurses, 0111, financial managers, 1114, other financial managers, and 0651, managers in customer or personal services. So those people with CRS scores of 439 plus received invitations under those draws. And then in July and August 1st, that's when the government rolled out one of the changes that they introduced this year in 2019, which is the tech draws. I mean, something that has garnered a lot of attention. They were pretty big draws. If you see, like 1,700, 1,600 people invited, and it was people that had CRS scores of 435 plus or 439 plus, but they were in particular occupations, and we'll take a look at those occupations. The reason, just so you know, the reason why there's an upper range on that, so they invited people with 439 to 465, 435 for 458. So the highest person had a 469 or 459, 458, as you can see there, is because the people who had scores higher than that, they would have been invited at the previous federal draw. So that's the people who happen to be invited there. But I can tell you, if I have a client who gets invited on August 15, has 464 or 465 as their CRS, and they get an OINP invitation under that targeted draw, I would tell that client, you know what, let's wait a couple of weeks and see whether you get an invitation under the federal government, because there's no need to apply twice. You have a competitive score. But if I have a client in the 450s or 440s, I would say we should take advantage of this, because you will not likely be invited under the federal draw. Okay. What is this tech pilot? This is something that BC is doing as well. It's interesting how Ontario and BC sometimes do a lot of things to get very similar things. And to be fair, like, it's normally Ontario that's copying BC. BC started with its entrepreneur programs and the EOI system. Ontario later on copied it, and like other provinces are doing the same. And I think BC started with the tech draws earlier, and then Ontario started doing the same as well. But I mean, it makes sense because these are we do work with a lot of employers in the tech industry. We have a lot of our employers have moved from the US and other countries to Canada, especially given what's happening in the US in the last few years to open subsidiaries here, and they're in the software development and other in the tech sector. And the main two places where they get settled are Toronto and Vancouver. So it makes sense why those provinces are interested in attracting employees who have, or workers who have these this skill set and these skills. So this is new as of the summer of 2019. There's a list of targeted knock codes, and it includes software engineers and designers, computer programmers, computer engineers, web designers and developers, database analysts and data administrators, and computer and information systems managers. So I think if you look at this list and you go look, for instance, at the global talent stream list for the global talent stream LMIA, they're all in there as well. So again, these are occupations that I would probably say they're hot in Canada right now. If you could get an invitation under Ontario, under BC, under the provincial nominee programs without needing a job offer, because the provinces recognize that there's quite a demand for this, and the government has even made it easier to get LMIAs for people in these occupations, because they know that employers are struggling to find them in Canada. Okay, any questions about the human capital priority stream? We'll move now to a stream that I really like, the French-speaking skilled worker. Unfortunately, there haven't been many draws this year, but it's one that I really can. Every time I have someone who is doing the typical consultation to come to Canada, they're not competitive under express entry, but they are fluent in French, highly fluent in French, and they have a good English level. I always think, ooh, I'll wonder if they're interested in Ontario as one of the provinces to settle, and I always think of the French-speaking skilled worker. So the reason for this is that there's no minimum CRS, and actually there's people in the 350s or like 300s who get invited under this program. So even if you don't have a very competitive score, you could get an invitation here. Now you do have to have a CLB 7 in French, which is not as high as a CLB 9. And a CLB 6 in English. So you do have to be bilingual and meet those two requirements to be able to get an invitation. Now, not everyone gets an invitation, but you need to meet those requirements. Education is same as a human capital priority stream. So basically, you need to have a bachelor's or more. Work experience, again, it's assessed under CEC or FSW. So either 1 year anywhere in the world, continuous in the last 5 years, or CEC 1 year in the last 3 years, does not need to be continuous in Canada. Settlement funds, same requirements as the human capital priority stream. You need to show intention to reside in Ontario, and again, same as we discussed before. And if you're in Canada, you need to have legal status. So the draws, and as you see, like there's no minimum CRS score there. So like, I mean, if your client has those two languages, no limit on age or anything like that. They're very competitive to get an invitation under the French-speaking skilled worker. The unfortunate thing is that the draws this year were all early. So like the last one that we had was May 22nd. They held them all like in January. They did a lot in January and then 2 in February. So I don't know why they didn't just like space it out a little bit more. Because unfortunately we've had clients who have registered their express entry profile since then and they haven't been able to be invited. So I'm guessing we'll have to wait to next year and see what it is like then. And the last one, the skilled trades stream. So the express entry skilled trades stream under Ontario. This is one that I really appreciate, and the main reason for this is because I find that under express entry, FST almost became obsolete, and I'll justify why I make this argument. So basically, when express entry rolled out, so let's start with the basics. What do you need to qualify under FST? So you need 2 years in the last 5 in a skilled trade of work experience. You need certain English or French level, but it's much lower than FSW and CEC. CLB 5, I think, in reading and listening, and CLB 4 in writing and speaking, if I'm correct. And then the most challenging part is that you'll need either a job offer that's backed by an LMIA or you need a certificate of qualification if the trade is licensed in Ontario or in Canada and you have that provincial license. So if you're an electrician and you have the provincial license as an electrician, you don't need the job offer. But if you don't, you do need a job offer that's subject to an LMIA. So that's a little bit strict. When Express Entry rolled out at the beginning of 2015, LMIA job offers counted for 600 points. So most people who qualify under FST, if they had the LMIA job offer, they would receive an invitation because they would get an extra 600 points. Those who did not have the job offer, they only had the certificate of qualification, those were kind of like left out. And then there were fair criticisms, which I fully agree with, that the job offers were overblown. We were giving easy invitations to people who might have a job now, but they might not have a job in the future, and their English, French skills and their education is not very high. So the government decided to adjust that and say, okay, we're only going to give 50 points if it's NOC 0 A or B, and 200 points to job offers if it's NOC 0. So where does that leave people who are in the skilled trades? So yeah, they might have an LMIA job offer in some cases. They get 50 points. They might get extra points for certificate of qualification because you get points in Express Entry if you have a certificate of qualification under a trade. But these are normally people who don't have bachelors. These are normally people who don't have 2 degrees, and people who normally their English and French level is not very high. So they're not going to be competitive under Express Entry, even if they get the 50 points for their job offer with an LMIA. So at that point, when they made those point systems, it became very difficult for people who just qualify under FST, who their language and their education is not that high, to be able to be invited under Express Entry. So there's 2 solutions to be able to include those people because they're important. These are jobs that are hard to find in Canada, and that's why we have a program for permanent residence for them. So there's 2 ways that the government has tried to include them. One of them is the federal government having federal skilled trade specific Express Entry draws. So they do some draws where it's only people in the FST pool, and you see that the CRS score goes down to like 200 and something, maybe 300 and something. Maybe one of them went down to 200. So it's only people in that who are only has FST, and then okay, some of them can get an invitation, which they would never be able to get if they were competing with the other pools, the pool of the other programs. And then the other thing that provinces have done is, okay, let's offer an opportunity for applicants who are under FST and meet certain requirements that we impose to be able to get an invitation under our programs, and then that way they apply to us. If they get the nomination, they'll get an extra 600 points, which will guarantee an invitation under Express Entry. So let me know if that's not clear. I mean, if you have any questions about that, but people who are strictly FST applicants in the Express Entry pool, they have a hard time. Unless there's an Express Entry draw that's specific to them, it's very hard for them to get invitations, or almost impossible. And that's why the provinces have kind of like jumped in and said, okay, we do value these jobs. They are important, and let's do a program that's specific to them. And Ontario has one of those. So again, no minimum CRS to be eligible for this. And actually a lot of people with like not very high CRSs get invited. They did impose an extra requirement, which is that you need to have Canadian work experience under the trade. So it's not enough to just have an LMIA or a certificate of qualification and qualify for FST because you have the 2 years in the last 5 of experience in that trade. You actually need to also have CEC qualification, which means 1 year of work experience in the last 3. Doesn't have to be continuous, it could be cumulative in that trade. And they imposed the same language requirement as CEC, which is CLB 5 for, well, they're all NOC B occupations. So CLB 5, either in English or French, in all the different skills. So English, writing, listening, and speaking. Okay? So you could be an FST applicant. You could be qualified under FST, but you also need to qualify under CEC. Have the minimum language requirements and have the 1 year of experience in the last 3. In addition to that, you need to be currently residing in Ontario on a work permit. So you can't be a student, you can't be a visitor. You need to have a work permit. You need to show the same funds as the human capital priority stream, so either with a job or with savings, and you need to prove your intention to reside in Ontario. But as we discussed before, these are people who are living and working in Ontario, so it shouldn't be too difficult to prove that. Now, okay, 1 year of experience in the last 3 in Canada at least. What kind of experience is considered? So in addition to be qualifying under CEC and FSD, or being in a trade at least, they'll need to have 12 months of cumulative full-time experience in Ontario within the last 2 years. So this is a little bit further. It's not just any kind of Canadian experience. They need to have 1 year in the last 2 in Ontario. And their work experience must be in a skilled trade occupation. So it has to be 633, major group 672, 73, or 82. So this is not the exact same list as the Federal Skilled Trades Program. In the Federal Skilled Trades Program, they also include 632, which is chefs and cooks, and major group 92, which is all the processing, manufacturing, and utility supervisors and operators. Okay. So let's try to unpack this a little bit again, because I don't want to get too confused with FSD. You have people who are in the trades. So to qualify under this program, you need to be in the trades, either in group 633 or all of the major groups 7. So the NOCs that started with 72, 73, or 82. You need to have worked in Ontario for at least 1 year in the last 2. That should, and you should be able to qualify under CEC. So that means that you need to have worked as an employee, and you need to meet a language requirement of CLB5. Now, do you need the certificate of qualification? Is it mandatory? Or the LMIA job offer to qualify under this? No, not necessarily. That's something that you'll need to qualify under FSD. To qualify under FSD, you need either an LMIA job offer, or you be under an LMIA work permit, or have a certificate of qualification from the province. For this, Ontario program is not necessary. You could have, you could be under an open work permit, let's say as a spouse or as a post-graduation work permit. You could be working in one of the trades. You could have worked in Ontario for at least 1 year in the last 2, currently residing here on that work permit, which could be open or closed, CLB5, and you'll still meet the requirements here. You will be qualifying under CEC though, and that's important. So not to be confused with FSD, because they're quite different in their requirements. And with regards to the certification, it is required if it's a regulated occupation. So if in Ontario, to be able to work as an electrician, you need to have an electrician license, then they're going to require it. But if in order to be, a construction worker, you don't need a license and it fits under one of these trades, then that's fine. That's not gonna be required. And in terms of the draws, there's been 2 draws this year. One in January 2024, where they issued 371 invitations, and then March 21st, where they issued 361 invitations. And I kind of wish I had made note of that asterisk there, but I didn't include it. And again, like the CRS scores of people who are invited, I don't think they were specifically targeting anything. It's just basically the people who meet those requirements. So a good option for those of you who are in the trades in Ontario. I might not be competitive under Express Entry. We have a question from Alex. Currently residents in Ontario at the time of submitting the application, or need to stay in Ontario for the whole process? I would say this is at the time of submitting the application. It's a good question. Because it could be at the time of nomination too. I think, because we've done, other types of applications where we switch our clients to a visitor, and as long as we met the requirements at the beginning, that was fine. I think I mean, I would say at least at the time of at the time of applying, and then, but you might have to look at the guidelines, and there might be one of those that is not found in the guidelines, and then just see how the government treats it. But probably, but I mean, if not, then you should at least switch them to a visitor if they're staying here. But that's a good question, and one that it's worth maybe like looking in the guideline to see whether they do need to have the residence at the time of nomination, which would be around 2 to 3 months later, or whether it is at the time of invitation. I think I would make the argument that it would be at the time, sorry, not invitation, well, at the time that you submit the application to OINP for sure. So you'll get the notification of interest. That's not the application. You'll have to submit the application, I would say, at least at the time that you're submitting the application. They might require during processing, which I've seen happen, evidence that you've applied to, if you're still in Canada, to at least extend your status to make sure that you're still in legal status. But it's worth looking into in the guideline, and if not, something worth asking to Ontario, to the representatives, because it's definitely something that's worth requires clarification. Okay, so we basically, I mean, I'll talk about the regional pilot for a bit. This is something that was announced again in 2019 as one of the changes, but we don't really know yet what it's going to look like. So basically, the Ontario government is engaging with certain rural and small community stakeholders to assess their interest in proposed immigration pilot. To attract people to those regions. And again, I really like this pilots, like the new remote communities pilot that the federal government is starting to. I'm looking forward to seeing the details about that one, because mainly, I mean, I think this is a good way to get people to populate other areas of the country and not just staying in the main cities in Canada. Again, we don't know what it's going to look like. We know that they're doing this kind of, they're having these communications and they're having like this kind of discussions with smaller populations, so 20,000 to 200,000. Those are the ones that are going to be included. They need to have some kind of like newcomer settlement programs in place and infrastructure, and they're looking at their economic characteristics as well. So we'll have to wait. So I mean, so this program, like it hasn't been announced. We'll have to wait to see what is going to be the criteria. If it's going to be an employer-driven program, I would imagine it probably might be. So you might need to have a job offer, but I'm pretty sure the requirements for the employers will be much lower than it could be with the other programs. Or maybe it might not be an employer-driven program, but they might require some work experience or study there. I don't know. Because the thing though is just like, I mean, what if you if you don't tie to an employer, if you don't tie to having been living in that community, how do you know that people are going to be staying there, right? So we'll have to see what's going to be the requirements. But it's good to hear, and like I always really appreciate that governments are trying to bring people to other cities, so that condos in Toronto are not just ridiculously expensive and continue going up. The same thing in Vancouver and like I don't know, like Calgary and Quebec. It's good to bring people somewhere else, and I think PNP has excellent with that. I mean, when Express Entry became so competitive, and it's so hard to get an invitation under the federal programs, I think the provinces really jumped in. Well, the federal government started giving the provinces more spots, and the provinces have done a really good job at attracting people to navigate their programs. Now, I really haven't looked at the statistics, and I don't know if we have all those statistics yet of how many people stay in those provinces after 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. But if you look at the statistics of the people who immigrate to provinces such as Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, to give 3 examples, and they're under economic programs, and they're immigrating under PNP compared to the federal programs, it's huge. Sometimes I think it's like more than 90%, more than 70%. So it means that, well, if you look at Ontario and BC, it's like less than 20%. So it means that people who are settling there, they're doing mainly through PNP programs. And that what we conclude from that is that those people would likely not be settling there if it wasn't for those programs. I mean, if they just had navigated a federal program, they would probably be settling somewhere else, but they've decided to do it there because of that. And I've had many clients who have done that, who they were not competitive under express entry. They were maybe living in Ontario. They were interested definitely in Ontario, BC, maybe Alberta, and then they got an invitation from one of the smaller provinces to their provincial nominee programs, and they said, you know what, let's do it. Let's give it a try. I'll at least settle there at first, and we'll talk a little bit about that.